In this video, I am going to explain joint structure anatomy of hip and shoulder. Hip and shoulder are famous ball and socket joint. What is ball and socket joint? It's simply shape of joint. Let's see. This is head of femur. Head of femur shapes like ball, right? Then this part, pelvic side, this is concave surface. It's like this. Ball and socket, it's like this. Ball fits to socket. Head of femur fits to this concave surface. This concave surface is called acetabulum. It's very deep bony structure. Imagine there is head of femur like this. This is imaginary line. Acetabulum is very deep. See that? You don't see that the deepest part. It's that deep. And head of femur is very big and very round shape. Imagine there's head of femur right here. Very deep and very well stabilized. Let's compare to shoulder joint. This is shoulder joint. This is humerus and this is scapula. This is head of humerus and this part is glenoid fossa. Glenoid fossa is concave surface of scapula. Head of humerus, glenoid fossa. It's not that deep. It's like head of humerus kind of sit on a glenoid fossa like this. Do you remember? Pelvic side is very deep compared to shoulder. See, this is hip. This is head of femur. This is acetabulum. Very deep, very strong structure. This is shoulder, scapula, head of humerus, and glenoid fossa. So what can you say? What can you say difference between shoulder and hip? Shoulder, it's not that deep. That means shoulder joint has more mobility and less stabilization because there's not much bony support for shoulder joint. Shoulder joint, very movable, very flexible. However, the other side is shoulder is not that very stabilized. How about hip joint? Do you remember this is very deep? Acetabulum is very deep. That means hip is very well stabilized. Then, hip is not that movable. Hip is very movable compared to other immovable joint. However, if you compare to shoulder joint, hip is not that movable compared to shoulder. However, hip joint is very well stabilized because of bony structure, joint structure. Let's compare to shoulder again. This is shoulder, head of humerus, glenoid fossa. See, glenoid fossa is very shallow. It's not like hip joint like this. It's like almost sitting on glenoid fossa. Not that much support from bony structure. I have to keep repeating. Shoulder joint is very movable. However, it's not very well stabilized. Hip joint, it's very stabilized. Not that much mobility. It's not that movable. Thus, shoulder joint tends to get more dislocation compared to hip joint. Do you remember hip is very well stabilized because of bony structure? How about shoulder? Not much. So these two are very famous ball and socket joint, shoulder joint and hip joint. They have some advantage and they have some disadvantage. Studying anatomy, studying joint structure is very important. I hope today's anatomy helps for your career and studying. If you liked today's video, please hit the like button, comment and subscribe. See you next video.